As we celebrate the 4th of July, we are quickly approaching the 250th year of our independence, which is a remarkable feat as a nation. Not many nations have lasted 250 years under their original foundation, the Declaration, and then, of course, 11 years later, we did the Constitution. But as we look at our nation, we've been one of the most free, prosperous nations in the history of the world. How did we get here? What allowed us to become a free nation? And this is what we celebrate on the 4th of July. Going back and remembering, we used to be British colonies. We were British subjects, and our leaders in America, they were appointed by the king. Our governors were appointed by the king, and we were represented by the British Parliament, and we didn't even have full representation. We couldn't send all of our leaders over there to represent us. And then the king actually suspended the British Bill of Rights because he thought we weren't doing a good enough job, and this led to founding fathers going, there might need to be something different we do. In fact, if you go back and look, when the First Continental Congress got together, it was September 6, 1774, and to understand their motivation, if you look, the very first motion that was made, Thomas Cushing made a motion that they should open with prayer. And they did, but recognizing the severity of the situation they were in, looking at potentially going to war against their own nation, the most powerful nation in the world at that time, that opening prayer went for about 2 hours. And in the midst of that prayer, they also read some Bible passages, things that were so encouraging them. In fact, John Adams wrote Abigail letters about how inspired they were by the verses they read that day. Well, as the story goes on, you then have in April of 1775, you have the shot heard around the world at Lexington Green, and then you have the battle at Concord Bridge. And actually, the reason even this happened is the king sent troops to go disarm the people. He said, I don't think we can trust them with guns, with gunpowder. We need to take those things away. And once that happened, it was very clear for the founding fathers, this looks like a full-on war's coming. You have the forming of the Continental Army. To go a little further, you have the Congress recognizing that we're going to have to split and go a different direction. And so you have Richard Henry Lee from Virginia, who makes the motion that we need to separate from Great Britain. The Congress determined that before we separate, we probably should have some kind of explanation for why we're separating. It became known as the Declaration of Independence. There was a committee of 5 that came up with it. It was Jefferson and John Adams and Franklin and Livingston and Sherman. They're the ones that come up with this, although Thomas Jefferson's the primary author. And if you look over my shoulder, the original draft of the Declaration, that's the first printing of the original draft of the Declaration hanging on the wall behind me. You actually can get online and see it today. And Jefferson's own handwriting, it's amazing. And the second paragraph is where he lays out the American philosophy of government, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. They open the acknowledgement, like, why are we separating? We have a different idea of government. We have a different philosophy than Great Britain does, because we believe that there's a creator and he gave us our rights. And the main role of government is to protect those rights. And then we believe in control of the people, consent of the governed. That's why in the Constitution, it starts off with we, the people of the United States. They believe that we should have power, not just one arbitrary figure thousands of miles away. And they go through incredible effort to make this happen. In fact, at the end of the Declaration, they conclude the thoughts by saying that with a firm reliance on divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. And when they signed up for that, that's exactly what they did. In fact, John Adams later wrote Abigail a letter, and he was reflecting on the cost for the founding fathers and for the rising generation, how they might not even fully understand it. And I'm going to read you part of the letter he wrote Abigail. He said, posterity, talking about the next generation, he said, you will never know how much it costs to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make a good use of it. If you do not, I shall repent in heaven that I ever took half the pains to prevent it. He recognized the cost was so high for them. And if you go back and read their story, you realize that many of them died. Some of them lost their wives, their children. Many of them lost their homes. Many of them gave all of the money they had. They actually ended up in poverty. Some of them were even arrested in debtor's prison because they couldn't pay the debts from the loans they took out to fund the revolution. As we look at the 4th of July, go back, study some of the founding fathers. Look at the price they paid for us to be free, and then think about what price should we be paying? What do we need to do to preserve freedom for the rising generations?